Leadership listeners, I have such a treat for you. I just told our guest today that her book is catnip for you. And I'm going to explain why. But my guest today is Lisa Bragg, and she is the author of how aptly named. Her book is called Bragging Rights. And we're going to talk today about how to speak up for yourself, how to own your space and your expertise in a way that is let's call it socially acceptable, in a way that puts you in a good light, in a way that you feel good about it, and also you get recognized. And I don't know about you, dear listeners, but this is something I've spent almost a lifetime talking about and asking questions about. And before I introduce her, I just want to also say about this book. This book is the why it's been so hard for you to get there. And that's what I really want to explain. It's not just your fault. Okay, so with that introduction, welcome, Lisa, to the podcast. Tell our listeners a little bit about you.
Oh, Jenny, thanks for that intro, though. There was so much already in that I'm like, let's just get to the good stuff.
I know.
But we have to stop and introduce ourselves because it's so important.
Yeah.
So I actually use a formula that I think of my friend, Dr. Andrea Wojnicki, present, past, future. So hi, I'm really happy to be on your show, Jenny, and talking to your listeners. I was the founder of MediaFace, one of Canada's first content companies, doing video animation e-learning way back, starting it in 2007. And I'm a former journalist too. And then I'm just really looking forward to taking my book and making sure that it gets into the hands of the people who really need it. And interestingly enough, I'm finding that a lot of people need it. So that's the present, past, future model of how to introduce yourself.
Wow. I mean, learnings in less than 30 seconds. This is awesome. What was I going to ask you? Tell me about the act of going from journalists behind the scenes, letting the words speak for themselves, to the face, the name of the business. That must have been a real whiplash for you.
Yeah, because back in my day as a journalist, I was in broadcasting. So I was on camera, but it wasn't about me. It was never about me. It was always about the stories and the audiences. And so we didn't really interject ourselves. Like, yes, I would be, here I am live in this park, but it's all about what's going on in the park. And we didn't really have that editorializing, the adding in our own personality to things. And so it was really different because I was also always aware and trying to check my bias and my perspective. And so making sure that things were balanced and not really putting my 2 cents in on things. And so it was challenging, especially as I started my media company, thinking, well, people are now looking for me and to talk to me. But I was really always then still about my content company. It was always about Lisa Bragg as CEO of MediaFace and putting that out there. So I didn't have, my title was my identity. And I didn't realize that that's actually a really dangerous place to be. If you're an entrepreneur, if you're in corporate, in any entity, you need to make sure that you have your own identity out in the world beyond your title. It's just for safety in so many different ways. And so it was a challenge to say, you know what, here's where I stand. Here's my point of view. Here's my perspective. And Jenny, I still struggle with being a hidden gem. You know, I want my work to stand on its own. And what do you mean you can't just find it on the internet yourself and it just lands in everyone's inbox? It's not the way the world works. So to be actively out there saying, hey, here's how I'm meant to serve is actually a challenge for me. And I need to constantly be out there. And I have a few characters in the book. Amelia Sams, same thing, brilliant woman, but put yourself out there for too much. And then sometimes you feel like you need to retreat. But how do you keep going out there and making sure the world knows how you're here to serve? Because that's really what it's about, is how you're here to serve.
Oh boy. So, you know, I've heard people say that publicity is icky. I've heard people say that my clients often, it's, you know, especially if they work at not-for-profit, it's not about them, the leader, it's about the organization and the mission, which I agree to a certain extent, Lisa. The place I challenge them, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, is they need to find you. They need to identify with you. Leadership matters, like who you are and how you show up. They're trying to decide in sometimes whether they're going to give you money or not, and they have to believe in you. Did you find that too when you were doing the research, this oxymoron?
But for sure, people want it's humans helping humans. And so we have these big brands and people know the brands, but then when we know the story behind the brand, the person behind the brand, people want to really attach themselves. And that's why, fortunately and unfortunately, we have these CEO heroes, right?
Yeah.
The hero myth
Yeah.
of a CEO. And
Totally.
sometimes it backfires for organizations. And that's why I always tell when I work within organizations to make sure that they give profile to lots of people and not just their CEO, because that's a little bit too much sometimes. But a lot of organizations, they do need to have their person out in front. They need to have that person as the spokesperson talking about the good and a name attached to it. Humans want to interact and talk to humans even more so nowadays as we go through this as we live in the future. We need to have that human context. And so that's where we really need to see the human behind whatever it is. And I get it. We want our missions to stand on their own. And it's not me. It's not about me. Yeah. But somebody has to be the face of it. Somebody has to bring it forward. And it's, if you are the CEO or in a leadership position, it is you. And it's also important for you to do that, not just to get more clients or to get more donors, but also engage employees. It's the halo effect. We want to make sure that our employees see awesome people working at our organizations, so they will want to come with us and align with our values and then to help us grow. So it's a halo effect. So if you're ignoring it, it's problematic through and through throughout your business.
Oh, that is such a great point about employees. I'm taking that to heart. I think my best example I have of this human first approach, the new executive director or CEO or whatever of Sick Kids in Toronto, one of the large foundations, she has been very present on LinkedIn. She writes not personal, but like she really shows pictures of her life and her experience. And she speaks to this kind of glow that she has about being the leader of this organization. She also happens to be a Black woman, which I think is also just freaking awesome. And, I can kind of see the detractors lining up, Lisa, to be honest, and putting her in the rifle sights. So let's talk about why people put women in their rifle sights. I don't know where to, you start us off. You have all these myths that you bust in the book, but where do you want to start?
Yeah, you know what? I love that she feels in the glow. And what I think we all need to do is make sure we go and find her and follow her.
Yes.
And support her.
Yes.
So hopefully you put her name and you let us know who she is. But it's the tall poppy syndrome. And we think we're always above it, and then we're not. I was just talking to a large national bank, and afterwards, people came up to me and said, tall poppy syndrome, when you spoke about that, it really resonated. So tall poppy syndrome is, so when they look out over their fields, the poppies, they would lob off the heads of anyone that wasn't tall. They wanted the uniformity, so it would grow together. And unfortunately, we do that in our working life too. And my friend, Dr. Rumi Billen, has done extensive amount of research on it. And so it came as a term, first of all, in Australia, then UK. And of course, now we have it in Canada and North America, and we talk about it too. But what it is that when we see somebody who's growing up above us, wow, what happened? How's that happening? Then we start getting catty. We talk about them. We try to bring them down. Sometimes people will refer to it as the crab bucket. Who do you think you are to leave our bucket? We're going to bring you back down into it. And so that's the problem, where we do become that, and we get catty with it. And we question, well, how did she get her sponsor? What's behind that? What's the innuendo behind that? And so we do these things to each other. And as my friend's research shows, it's often women reporting that it's other women doing it. So that's part of the scarcity mindset. And how do we reframe that and think of the abundance mindset? So two things. If you are the person that's being cut down, so people are jealous of you, commenting, making these things, you're hearing the whispers, you have to realize it's them and not you. And I know that's a little solace, but it really is them. It's on them. So you have to keep going and try to be as strong, rally other friends, and get that mindset going. And if you are jealous and cutting someone down, what is it about you that is making you jealous?
Yep.
And why are you cutting that person down? So it's really on the person who's doing that action. And if you're hearing that action, if you're a bystander or participating, what is it that you're feeding into? Because you know what? It does eventually happen. This is back in grade school kind of stuff, right?
Totally.
But it does eventually happen to you when you have any success. And if you're trying to be successful in any way, you want your company to grow, you want to bring in another donor, whatever it is, and you have success, people will do that to you if they don't have that abundance mindset. So realizing that, hey, why am I being like that? And maybe I should stop and I should stand up for the person that's being cut down, because the next time it will be you.
Ouch. And that, in coaching, we talk about that, the time that the action happens and the reaction to it, Lisa. So that moment is golden, right?
Yeah.
So you see someone being above their britches, to use the language of the book, right? And you have a choice. You can either celebrate them and amplify them, or you can say, well, she only got there because of X, and diminish her. And I think the takeaway for me is, when you diminish her, you diminish all of us.
You do. Yeah, you diminish all of us. And so that's where you have to really, do that counting in your head before you say things sometimes. So that's really good advice, though, is think about it. Yeah.
Think about it. We talk, tell folks about the Matilda effect, because I really like that in your book. And I think what it reminded me of was that we're not done yet, right? It actually is a thing. Tell our listeners more about Matilda.
Yeah. So it was a term coined, and I can't remember the person who coined it, but it's in the book. But it was around in the 1990s. A woman scientist was going back and saying, where are all the women scientists? Yeah. And essentially their names had been erased from public record. But if you go back into the college, the university records, you can find them, or they may be the third or fourth on the paper and not right up front. Yeah. But meanwhile, they did all the work. And so we were erased from being top billing. And so that's problematic. And then we don't have the stories to share, or the papers that, come to life nowadays. We're not carrying their names forward. So we think women didn't exist in science, but women definitely existed in science. So it was about science that she was really looking at it. And it's, so how do we make sure that we are now going back and looking for, where are the women? What was the contribution back then? Because we are built on the shoulders of giants. But when we see that the giants are only the men, then we don't think that we had a place in it. But we did have a place. So some of our history has been erased. So how do we then go back and make sure that we're writing the record? And there was a woman who was awesome who went on Wikipedia. And because Wikipedia was very skewed towards men, because men were filling it out. Yeah. And so she went through and spent, I don't know how long, adding all these women to Wikipedia to make sure that the record is set straight, or the record is even there. Forget about being straight. The record is even there of women's contributions to a whole slew, but specifically in science, but yes, many other areas, but science too, that Matilda effect wasn't continuing on. And so that's where we need to make sure that credit is given where it's due. And I know right now you're saying, but I shouldn't take credit because it's for the team.
Yes.
And I know that. And we love that. And I'm a team player, but we also need to realize that credit goes where credit knows. So when Tom was the team lead the first time around, and he did a great job, and we were so happy to rally around to Tom. And then Tom goes off on paternity leave. He shows up the last day and he brings us all coffee. Thanks, Tom. Great. Well, who do you think, as we win that next proposal, will get the credit? Yeah. Tom brought the coffee. Tom's going to get the credit, because they already know that Tom has won us. Yeah, they know Tom, and they know that he's been a winner before, and we love Tom. But that's where we're indicatively lazy. Like when you have a babysitter or childcare person, you're not actually asking them every day for their resume. Yeah. We give a check mark and say, that's a trusted person. Yeah. And then we go on with our day. And so when we look at a team, we see our trusted person and Tom, we give him the check mark again, even though Beth was the number one person on this team, or, pick a name, but she was the number one person and really led it home. But she wasn't also leaving us the breadcrumbs or the moments that matter, the moments along the way to show us her work. And we need to ask people more to show us their work so that we can know who to give credit to. And I don't want this to be a free-for-all for claiming credit. And that's why in the book, I have some tips on how to help your teams claim and then also give credit. Because if someone's always taking credit as a leader, lean in and say, hey, curious to say, who would you give credit to?
Right.
And then blah, 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 they'll tell you really the whole story often of who really was behind it, or if they were really the champion. And having those listening ears and leaning into that, really important for the credit game.
Yeah, the credit game. I think that's important. You know, in the book, you talk about how so many women just sit on the sidelines and wait for their turn or assume that really good work is going to get recognized. And you used the quote, and it stuck with me. And I'm going to forget who it was that said, no, it was Carol Dweck from one of my favorite books about mindset. And she said, if your entire life was grade school, girls would be on top of everything. Yeah. Because we show up and we follow the rules and we do the work. But life's not like that. And so I think your comment about credit is important. Question: how do you get seen above your direct report? That's a question I get a lot of. Like, how do you get visibility in a classy way that's not like going over your boss's head? Any advice?
Well, one super simple way that you're going to be like, yeah, is sending thank you notes. It's one of those simple ways that we forget to do, is making sure that when we send a thank you note that we are including more people than if our boss did something great. It's okay to send a thank you note or something else that's a little bit wider that might get into the realm of your leader once removed so just adding those thank you notes or doing things that you are seen in that positive light that supports your leader, because we don't want to trump our leaders. We want to make sure that they are also seen. So what's a way that we could spotlight our leader without being, hokey or, it has to be authentic. But if she is doing an awesome job, I want to make sure that her boss knows she's doing an awesome job. And so it's like that braggitude. I didn't make that up. I just love it though. So it's a brag plus gratitude. Hey, I was able to land this new client or new donor thanks to my leaders, whatever it is. And so she's going to send that because she also knows that she needs to have a brag book, smile file, whatever you want to call it, that she takes to her leader and says, hey, look, my team is really happy with me. Here's because I'm sure my metrics include employee engagement, that my team is happy, but I have this evidence from my team that they are actually really quite engaged and enjoying. And I also, even though maybe I'm not directly part of gaining the numbers, but I am making a difference with those numbers, and my team has then reinforced that. So that's a way of making sure that you are making your leader shine. And I bet you anything that she's going to come back and make sure that you shine even more, because we're like that. We want to reciprocate it. And so that's where helping others to shine is a really big part of the book. But braggitude is one of the easiest ways to get out and make sure that people, it's bragging without what people I'd say is icky. I did international research for the book and people thought bragging is icky. But that's one of the ways that we can really make sure that you don't feel icky as you get out there and talk about your successes.
Wow. There's so much core beliefs that's tied behind this, right? Like, the idea of playing small, playing safe for women versus, I often talk about how, everything you're doing right now is in your comfort zone. And most of the growth is going to happen within an inch. I'm doing circles. If you're on podcasts, I'm holding my hands in a circle, broadening that circle and trying new things. I do think, and the research supports it, that for women to take risks is much higher risk, right? Like, there's actual social hierarchy that will be affected if you fail. In the olden days, I used to say, if you're ostracized as a woman, you have no pot of soup to stir and no food for your kids. But if you're a man and you're ostracized, you're just a little eccentric and you get to do your own hunting. Like, it's a very different set of expectations. And I think it's important for us to know that, Lisa. I think it really, like I said earlier, this is the why of the book, but it doesn't have to be like a no-go. I think context and understanding what's going on is very important to help you fuel that motivation that you have to be seen.
Yeah, there are still penalties, and that's the challenge. And so that's why we need to sometimes, when I say sometimes we need to soften our brag and soften things. Yeah. It's like, well, no, aren't we supposed to stand in our power and be brave? And it's like, yes. And sometimes our workplaces just aren't ready for it. And that's why I made sure that there is a whole chapter dedicated to leadership so that we can start seeing these things and how we are in the systems that have been built that haven't been built to support everyone. And so that we can make sure that we're watching out for, these signals. And when a woman who's, should be the CEO is being told, well, she talks too much about herself, talks too little about herself. Like that's like the whole, you in the same report, you'll get that exact thing. Too brash, not brash and like not bold enough. It's like, how do you measure these things? The challenge is, and what we need to keep doing is we need to keep changing it. And, people keep saying, it'll change for the next generation. I would like us to stop that. That is like I'm going to use an old fashioned term, a bugaboo for me, just because that'll stand out for people, because it's so tiresome to say the next generation, where we have so many generations in the workforce today that we need to change things for the boomers, for the X's, for the Z's, the millennials, the alphas. We need to change things today and not just say, I'm going to invest in the next generation. Change it for your peers, change it for your leaders. Let's do things today. So when we're considering and someone is talking about their successes, why are we feeling negative about that? Would we? And that a great example is from Kristen Pressner. There's a TED talk that she did. I mentioned it in the book, and it's flip it to test it. And she's not the first one who's done it, but she just tells the story so succinctly. And it's really, would I say that about a man? Like, so when we see images and we say, which one's the homemaker? And then we see a man and it's like, oh, that's not the homemaker. And we see a pilot. That's not the pilot as a woman. Would we say that about a man? So the flip it to test it is a really good way for all of us. But you know what, Jenny, I haven't defined bragging. So I think that might be a good.
Please do. Yeah.
Yeah. So bragging originally meant, so I did a lot of research for this book, and bragging originally meant shine, shimmer, and bravery. And I love that. And it was in several languages that it meant that. But bragging means to talk about one's success with pride. And the reframe is that pride also means self-love. And so that's where I want all of us to stop for a second, give yourself a pat on the back. Let's do it. Pat on the back, because it's that justified self-love. And what it really means in the end, it's you being of service to the world. It's letting the world know how you are of service, because otherwise they're going to go to that mediocre person down the hall or down the block or the next wherever over, instead of going to you, because you are waiting as a hidden gem because of all this language we've been given, especially as young girls, to put your head down, do good work, and eventually someone will notice you. All the myths. Wait your turn. Be so good they can't ignore you, which is a burnout recipe.
Be so good they can't ignore you. Holy.
Yeah. So like that's Steve Martin, great comedian, but and I get what he means, but we are that good. You are already that 99.9%. You're already doing 110%. That job that you're looking at, you don't just have 100% of the nice to haves and the qualifications. You have more than that, but you're guessing, well, should I make that move? Because you know what? There's one I don't actually have that next level certificate in. So I should wait 3 years to get that next level. Where somebody else, a guy will come, Tara Moyer's research showed that a man will go in at, I think it's 40%. I should look it up again. It's in the book. But he'll go in based on the promise, betting on yourself. And so I want us to reframe to bet on ourselves more than saying I have to have. So it's less of an exhaustion place and more of a bet on yourself place.
And when the stress and the exhaustion. So the way I try and reframe it in my head is I talk a lot about mindset with my clients. I talk a lot about perceptions for sure, because you have to know what they are. And that actually comes up in the Embracing Ambition book. Perception barriers are one of the things that all women will encounter when they come through the workforce. But the idea of reaching up to something from a scarcity place and striving for the next role versus believing that you're already whole and that you have something to offer and you're extending yourself. Even just the visual of that, Lisa, rather than reaching up like ladder, going across and opening up. And like, it's amazing that metaphor. People go, oh, right.
Oh, I love that. Because I'm right now, I'm like pretending I'm climbing the ladder, but then if I give my length, like ballet arms, that does feel, that's expansive, then that's scurry. So that's a great visual. Thank you for that.
And you get like hooked onto your patterns, right? So the other thing I think that's worth mentioning is for those of us overachiever women on the call who have been,
who, me?
Right? Like who have been working their butts off and working really hard. You know, I understand that it's really hard to let go of that. I want to honor that has what's got you to this place. There is a dark side to it besides the burnout part. I just want to say that. But when you get into those senior leadership spaces, they're picking up, the only way I can describe it is on your energy. Yeah. And when your energy is frazzled or anxious, or you spend so much of your time defending your position, this is when I see all the time women go in and defend rather than say, interesting, let me get back to you, right? Like, why do we feel we need to respond in the moment and explain ourselves? So I think that beware of the energy you bring to the spaces you're in. And I don't mean that in a way of, there's a place for excited energy. There's a place for reflection, but owning your, what's his name? Pigpen trail. Pigpen has that trail after you. Owning that and knowing that your presence. I remember going into a meeting one time where I didn't believe the way everybody else in the room believed a situation was going down. And I was quite confident based on my relationship with the person we were talking about that this was not the case. But they came in with this sort of da 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 da, right? Like, this is the proof. This is what this quote says. Da 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 da. And I kept saying, this is not the person I know. And it was interesting because I quickly wanted to pick apart, Lisa, this is actually very interesting. I wanted to pick apart the research or the data, right? And I knew that I couldn't win that way. I couldn't win by telling them they were wrong just for a good, not that very rarely works. I needed them to see that I felt confident in my perception of this person. So I was not there to defend the perception of the person. I was there to provide a different option and let them consider whether that was even possible. And all I really wanted out of the meeting was a chance to set up a meeting with everybody, because part of the issue was surprise, surprise, communication. Nobody talks to anybody. And so they've made all these crazy assumptions, which I know to be false because I know the person. And it's amazing when there's a communication gap, how we fill it in with negatives, right?
Yeah. And that's where it's always one of the things that I always say, it's always worth another conversation or tell me more. And that's where we lean into it and we invite more conversations. And that's where we can take a pause. And I think we're so quick to move forward on things. I'm getting better and better. I wiggle my toes. So if I'm like, okay, stop, wiggle your toes, because it's getting you grounded again. And so I'm like, wiggle my toes, because then we're getting grounded to say, I can pause. I can hold my emotional intelligence and then make sure that I'm being strategic in what I'm saying and that I don't have to respond right away. North Americans hate silence. And so silence is a great thing to own and get really comfortable with. So allowing that silence, that break. And as facilitators, we know that, but we don't like, as North Americans, silence. And that also a good idea to know when you're working with people internationally that other people love silence. And so they can have 8 seconds of silence and still feel very comfortable. I think our level of silence is 3 seconds or something. Somebody can easily find it's 3 seconds, 2 seconds. We don't like silence. And when I facilitate workshops, I can feel it, because it's like, who wants to go first? And nobody wants to go. And then I pause and then somebody wants to go right away, because it's like they can't bear the silence of things.
That's so interesting. I think too, for smart women, we use our heads a lot. And I'm holding my hand under my chin if you're listening to the podcast. So I'm cutting my head off from my body. And so we think we can think our way out of problems. And, especially in high stress situations, we think we can go think faster than everybody else. And as I get older and as I read more about the research about coaching, so I have been obsessed with the parasympathetic nervous system and the stress nervous system. And I have been sort of trying to map this onto how I'm coaching, because when we are, when we have triggers as women, and granted, men have triggers too. I'm just saying the typical triggers for women are that there's the stress moment and we go into tight, right? We tighten up, we breathe shallow, we do all these crazy things, which are very, very natural for anybody on the call. It's completely normal. So one of the solutions is tapping into that parasympathetic nervous system, which is about silence. Got it. Did you feel it on the call? Like just taking a breath. We're getting very excited about this topic, you and I, as an example, right? reframing and reminding yourself. One of the elements of it is we need 3 positives to counteract 1 negative. And so we feel the negatives way stronger. And so labeling them when they happen, oh, that really hurt. She just insulted me, or he just insulted me. Labeling it and then regrouping and finding and reconnecting with that parasympathetic nervous system so that you can, when you are in stress mode, you are not going to create the best arguments. You are not. It's biologically programmed that all the blood's going to your tummy, right? All to your heart to keep you alive. And when I share this story with people, they're like, oh, like they thought they were supposed to be superheroes, Lisa.
Yeah.
You know?
And that's where breathing, we can change, because you gave a breath there, and you giving a breath reminds me to breathe, because we get way up. Like you said, we're very excited about this conversation. So our voices get really high because we're really super excited. And then we're not breathing and getting it all the way in. So lots of things are happening when we're not breathing. So one other tip that someone else told me not too long ago was how we can influence, when we're talking to people, their breath. So if we're breathing, and I'll do this in some workshops too, I'll say, let's all breathe together. And people are like, what do you mean? But when we're actively breathing, oh yeah, we have to remember to breathe. And then we all start to calm down. So try it. Try this when you can try it with your kids too, but it might be a little harder with them. But when you're in a room, be active, show breathing a little bit more, and people might pick up on it, but you can influence how people breathe in a room by calming your breath down. And so it's one of those parasympathetic. How do we do that? Because we're often in the same environment and we want to show body signs of calm instead of ratcheting it up ourselves. And so just breathing, wiggling your toes, tapping does work too. And if you're, and so they're not going to see your hand underneath this, tap. I'm not an expert in tapping, but tapping in those strategic places that feel good to you, or just even remember to tap. It's like, okay, I'm here and I'm present and I'm not all in my head. And that's where I really talk about to my clients how to move from being in our heads. And when I'm in workshops, especially with financial services people, they're like, what?
I know.
Moving from our heads, which we love to be in, like you said, above our, but how do we move from our heads to our hearts and then into intuition, which totally freaks them out. And I always tell them, you're going to freak out because I'm talking about intuition, which the markets are based so much on how we feel and all those things. But we need to move from just our heads. AI is here now. So how we are humans helping humans. And so I think that's one of the biggest places is that we're going to, in the near future, show that we're humans even more so. And so that's where we're seeing the smart skills come out. I don't like soft skills, but smart skills of empathy, of holding space for each other, of that reflection, all of those kind of things, I hope will come into play more, because I think the world of work needs it. This whole world needs more reflection. But if we all are holding space a little bit more and getting curious about each other, I think that's a big part of the work that I do. Surprisingly enough, when you think it's bragging and self-promotion, it's not a me story. It's really about, here's how I'm here to serve. And then how do I shine a light on others? That's really what it's about.
Yeah. Wow, you're speaking my language.
Oh, yay!
So I want to highlight in this season of Underdog Leadership, I have done some solo ones about some pitfalls that number twos often encounter. One of them is, for the love of God, would you please lead? Like, stop, like, what's the word? Collaborating your way out of this problem and lead, for God's sake. I have a woman named Amy Lynn Dern come in, and she's talking about, I can't remember if you're ahead of her or behind her, but for our listeners, go and listen to it. Rather emotional intelligence, but moving into spiritual intelligence. And she has some really interesting observations. And for some people, that word is a trigger. What I mean by that is maybe more intuitive. And she has a 21 list of sort of leadership characteristics or things that you need to be good at. One of them is the ability to hold space for people is, for example, one of the skills to learn. So I'm hopeful, Lisa, but I am also mindful that we still talk a lot about the difference between goals and a vision. So goals are let's use masculine energy, very specific, articulated, get her done. And vision is a future state, a way you want to feel. I'm hearing more of this language come in, but I'd like tons more of it. And I think women, and so here comes to the leadership paradox that we need to change, right? We need, or sorry, not paradox, paradigm. We need to change this idea that a typical leader is always in charge. A typical leader always knows what's best. Some of the most robust conversations I've had with leaders in my coaching is, I don't know where to go next. And how do I message that to my team without them feeling really afraid?
Yeah.
Lisa.
Yeah. That's where I love the term. I'm using it now. I'm showing a chart nowadays that I made about how it's a little bit in the book, but I've now made it even more so about how we have, cheerleaders and mentors and sponsors and brand ambassadors. And so I go into some of that in the book, but I didn't add in the book this great term from Jacqueline Novagarts, she's just a philanthropist and she's been in the financial services world, but she's really about microloans into women and how do we change the world that way. And so she's just got a great moral compass. And she talks about a Jesuit term called accompaniment, and that we are the guide on the side, but we are also the teacher and the student of the people that we're bringing along in our journey as leaders. And so when we can take that stance and articulate that to our team that, yes, I have the vision of where we're going, but I'm not going alone. We're accompanying each other. I originally was thinking the word partner, but because so many of the firms that I deal with, partner means like a power position thing. So it's also an investment, fiscal. So accompaniment is that nice term that we can learn from each other. And I think it's really significant because there's so many of us now that are different in the world. And my book goes into research that, because everyone always thinks, because I'm a Canadian white woman, so this book is not an N1. It's not just based on my perspectives. And I really decided to go and do this international research. And I have many different cultures. It's interesting though, because everyone says, well, that's my culture. That's my culture. And so that's why this book is really a global perspective. But it's the idea that we need to learn from each other. And in the world of work now, we need to fit in. We need to be part of teams. We need to belong. We also need to stand out, which was a thing that we didn't want to do before, especially in the factory era or when we're young. We don't want to necessarily stand out because that's a bad thing and we're going to lose our groups. And then we also need to add in our perspectives and adding in our stories of like, what, I was in the Middle East or I was, in this country or my family, like whatever it is, we need to add that in because that fabric makes us stronger, especially in the world of work today in North America, where we have so many different people. What is that adding in that makes us even stronger as an organization instead of just trying to be homogenized and losing out on opportunities because we don't see the bigger picture? We're in our silo. So we have to fit in, stand out, and add in. And that's when we take that positioning of accompaniment as leaders that we can then say, I really like your perspective and honor that other people have so much more to teach us. I think it's also a dangerous stance when our teams expect the leaders to know everything. I've had that. And it is so hard to say, I don't know what I don't know. And that's why I have you on my team, because that's the whole point of having a team. Otherwise, I would just, go forward and do my thing by myself. But a team, that's where the ideas are expected, and making sure that everyone feels that whole psychological safety. And, how do we bring that into it? I'm sure you've done lots of work on that, but how do we bring it together?
Yeah. And actually I have someone coming to talk about psychological safety too, because this is the season for this. This whole season is all about sort of all of these conversations and sidebar, just as not a shame on them, but just an interesting observation. And then I want to kind of close with kind of the key takeaways for people before we leave. There's an article today in the Globe and Mail. We're on this podcast recording. Where are we? Middle of March. And it was that the Canadian banks, I don't know if you saw it, have no succession plans for women. If you look at there's going to be a whole bunch of shakeups with the Canadian banks, and the CEOs are going to move on. And they don't have women in their pipeline. There are a couple of potentials, but they've either gone off elsewhere to get that expertise, which often happens. And what'll be really interesting to me, because one of the things that Chavender does is mentorship and succession planning. We really love that space. And what'll be interesting to me is whether they feel that's totally fine, or they acknowledge it as a downfall? Because to me, that's actually the more interesting thing than whether they have women or not in the pipeline. Do they see it as valuable, as a value or an importance, Lisa?
I think the thing is, though, that we're going to start to call them out on it, and
Yeah.
we're going to hold their feet to the fire. And so that's a big detriment because we are all much more values based. And so
Yeah.
when we see this and someone's calling out, especially beyond International Women's Month now,
Yeah.
and we see these things where you don't reflect any of my values, you don't reflect anything that I stand for. Why aren't there women in those rungs? Because you didn't do your due
Due
diligence
diligence?
15 years ago, and now we're all seeing that. And
Yeah.
my concern is that then they start to partake in tokenism, which is
Right.
very dangerous for everyone, because that person then doesn't have the supports to make it. And then we see women flown into positions all the time where they were set up to fail all the way through and through.
Yeah.
And so we need to make sure that not just the pipeline is there, but so it's so hard for people to get to be that high potential. Are you seeding that as they enter the workforce and all the way
Yeah.
through? And I talk about in my work, facilitators and obstructors. Are you becoming an obstructor as soon as she gets to middle management or into the next leadership role? Because that's where we come into that obstructor instead of being facilitators. Everyone wants to help the new people. But as we get more and more competitive, we then say, well, I'm going to obstruct her career. And I think that's a challenge. I think it's a big challenge for organizations that they need to start really working on it now and making sure that they have the plans for the future and owning up. When you don't have the plan, say, you know what, we really messed up, but here's what we're going to do. Because then that at least is signaling the values are there. And then making sure that you stick to your timelines, because that's a trust factor.
That is a
Earning
factor.
trust over time. You can't just quickly build trust by by throwing somebody in that spot, but earning the trust to say, here are the steps that we're taking to make sure that we have a robust pipeline of talented people through and through. And I think that signals to everyone in the workforce, including men, that these people are being brought along for a reason. They're qualified, and we need to make sure that we're not just having these silos of people who are seen as high potentials.
Yeah. And speaking from strengths instead of gaps, right? As a coach, it's really important to me that we talk about strengths rather than gaps, because we don't coach to fill gaps. We coach to enhance, to use that example of opening up. That's really what I see coaching being a real solution for. And just to put another thought in, the power of peer mentorship too. I really wholeheartedly believe we do some group coaching programs at Chavender. And what I find is it's like having, if there's 6 women in the room, you've got 5 other jobs that you get to experience without having the paycheck. And you learn a heck of a lot, let's just say it. You learn a shit ton from how other organizations do it. And I mean, this is so relevant. And that curiosity that you're speaking about, that ability to step out of what's comfortable. So in conclusion, there's so much, guys. I hope you go back and listen to this again, because there's so little nuggets. Could you encapsulate our audience is, number 2s to number 1s, things to keep on your radar as an aspiring woman?
I think it's own your brags, own your successes. So write them down, know them, give yourself that congratulations. Brag to yourself first is the first thing to do. Yeah. It's also very much, as women do, making sure you shine the spotlight on others as we go along. So we're not doing the tall poppy and cutting people down, but shining the spotlight, because you never know who's going up and who's going down, who has something that takes them out of the workforce. And then, oh, wow, that job that I didn't get, that is now available to me. And so allowing those things to happen, it's the abundance mindset, especially in scarcity times. I think that's really critical. I think the book has so many areas to consider, to share, and to do. I think there's a lot of exercises of self-reflection that we need to do. That self-reflection piece is one of those hurdles that we often don't do, because, as you said before, we're always climbing. But taking that time to self-reflect, it seems indulgent, but that's going to then allow you to leap ahead way further than you had even thought, because you've taken the time to really get clear on your intention and having a point of view on things. And I think that so often we want to please everyone, so we don't want to have a point of view. We're buying your point of view. I think it's really, you want to make sure you know your numbers, know the critical things that really make up a business, and be able to talk to that. And I would also say, know your leader's agenda. There's the corporate agenda, there's the mission, but what is the person once removed from you or above you? What is her or his agenda really? So leaning in and having that extra coffee or that lunch to find out what their agenda is. And one other thing I'd make sure is don't hitch your wagon to their stars. I guess is like the old term. You don't want to, we need to prop up our leaders and we give our work over to them, but leaders leave, especially in this era now. So making sure that you are standing on your own and that people see you for the significant contributions that you've been giving instead of losing all of that. I've seen far too many people, that person's going to take me everywhere. And then that person is headhunted somewhere else and they can't take you with them. They might like you, but they didn't leave you profile along the way. So we need to share our moments and not just our milestones as we grow in our careers and reach further. So those would be a few things.
That is fantastic advice. Lisa, you've been so generous with your ideas and your thoughts today. I just want to say thank you for that. Really appreciate that.
Thank you for letting me share.
Yeah. So how can people, besides buying your book, which is called Bragging Rights, I can't show you my copy because it's got all these Post-it notes, but have you got a
Please
copy
show it. It's one of my favorite things. I love seeing it.
All my Post-it notes, right?
This is my copy of it even because I have to always remember because people ask me things on the spot and I'm like, I can't remember what that is. So it's all the definitions. Here it is.
And where can they buy it? Yeah, where can they buy the book?
You can buy it everywhere, anywhere you buy books. Mostly online is the easiest way nowadays. So Amazon, Indigo if you're in Canada, but Barnes and Noble, all the places. And it's also available in print, ebook, and audiobook. So that's a lot of people are enjoying it as they walk is the audiobook. So that's a lot of fun for people that they take it on the go. But there's so much in the book that goes beyond this conversation. So if this has been of service to you, please do go out and get it. And if you love it, please give it a 5-star on Goodreads or Amazon because it helps then to get into to get more people. There's like all that algorithm stuff that happens, all that magic. It really does make a difference to people. And we just don't think our opinion matters. Or when we like something, we have to let more people know. So organic word of mouth has been one of my big things, and then getting those reviews. So I hope you pick up a copy, and I hope it helps you to move to the next level that you want to be at.
Oh, amazing. And didn't she do, dear listeners, a great job of speaking about herself and her book in a very respectful and enthusiastic way that felt genuine, but also encouraged you to take action because if people don't buy the book, the message doesn't get out, to your point, Lisa, right?
Exactly. And we want to be of service, and I think the thing is that we are so much give, but we also have to ask and take. Yep. And that's one thing is that we're often told, give it all away. And we do give a lot, but we also have to ask and we have to take. And remember that as you're doing things in life that you have to actually ask and take too. We're so giving, but we do have to ask.
So important.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that.
What a great place to end. I'm sure we can find you also on LinkedIn. So do connect with Lisa Bragg, Bragg. I'm sure that's not that hard to find, right, Lisa?
No, I'm Lisa Bragg. I'm pretty much out there for sure. And on Instagram, trying hard at that one too. It's at that Lisa Bragg. So Bragg. So thank you.
Well, listen, everybody, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. This has been a real gem. This 4th season is all about the different modes and modalities of leadership. And Lisa's conversation about how to speak about your strengths and your accomplishments really fits nicely into there. I will put Lisa's link to the book in the show notes. That's note to myself as I say this out loud. And reminder that Embracing Ambition is now also available. My book, we talked about glass cliff assignments today, Lisa. We talked about perception barriers. There's a lot of overlap. I look forward to seeing how you and I can talk more about this subject because it's obviously something we're we're a bit nutty about in a good way. So with that, I'm going to say goodbye, everybody. Thank you so much for listening. And if you have comments, if you have feedback about this particular episode or anything we're doing on the podcast, I really love to hear from you. It's jenny@chavender.com. Chavender is spelled like lavender, but with a CH at the beginning. If you have a topic you'd like to hear from us about, I would be delighted to hear from you and learn more about what interests you as a listener. Everybody have a great day. And like I like to say at the end, thanks, Lisa. Go be great.